Hello, welcome to the Aerospike Connect for Presto session. In this talk, we are going to learn how to query Aerospike using SQL queries and see some practical examples. So let's get started. Aerospike is a highly scalable key-value database. It's also a perfect choice for BI dashboarding. So what are the salient features of the Aerospike Presto connector? Presto gives an ability to run ANSI SQL queries on top of Aerospike in scale. We don't need to copy the data, and the queries will run in place and on demand. Schema inference is also supported by the Aerospike connector for Presto, so you won't need to provide the schema for tables you work with. The connector will figure them out and then cache them. But it's still recommended to specify a schema. Presto supports federated queries and provides an ability to join data between different catalogs, which could be backed by different Aerospike clusters or any other data source in one query. Integrate Aerospike into an ecosystem of multiple data storage technologies. This is another useful feature from Presto. If you have different data sources, once connected, there will be a unified interface for all of them, and there is no difference where the actual data is stored. There are plenty of BI tools to explore the data which use the JDBC interface, and Presto supports and exposes it. There is also an option to make different projections on the same Aerospike set, and the data that is not relevant will be ignored. Aerospike has 4,000 partitions per namespace. Presto has the limit of 2 billion splits. Split is a parallelism unit of Presto. In the Aerospike connector, we know to leverage it and support the maximum parallelism of Presto. So you can run 2 billion Presto jobs in parallel on top of Aerospike. We also partially support the new CBO feature that optimizes join queries. We know to extract the exact number of records in the set from the metadata. It's disabled by default and could be enabled via the connector configuration. Currently, we have a Docker deployment setup, which we will be using during this session to set up a Trino cluster with the Aerospike Connect for Presto. And we work on having a Kubernetes setup in the future. Now, we are supporting the Trino distribution of Presto, which is formerly known as Presto SQL. The first version released was for Presto SQL, and then we added support for Trino after it was rebranded. The Presto DB, which is now simply the Presto, connector is in beta and will be eventually released. This slide depicts usage examples of the Presto with the Aerospike connector. On the left side, we can see a screenshot of the Aerospike Data Browser that we will see in detail at the end of this session. Next to it at the top of the slide is the Tableau dashboard. Tableau is a well-known BI tool that helps visualize and analyze data. It's widely used by data analysts. At the bottom, there is a Jupyter notebook that can also be used for quick data sampling. As we already know, Presto exposes the JDBC interface, so it can be connected to any JDBC client tool. The most popular are dbeaver, Skrill, JetBrains Data Grip. A lot of them are open source and free tools. Now, let's take a quick look into the Trino architecture. There are two types of Trino servers, coordinators and workers. The Trino coordinator is a server that is responsible for parsing statements, planning queries, and managing Trino worker nodes. It is the brain of a Trino installation. It's also the node to which a client connects to submit statements for execution. A Trino worker is a server that is responsible for executing tasks and processing data. Worker nodes fetch data from connectors and exchange intermediate data with each other. The coordinator is responsible for fetching results from the workers and returning the final results to the client. So where's the Aerospike connector here? Aerospike Connector is a plugin within Trino Worker, and it is an implementation of Trino's SPI, which allows Trino to interact with Aerospike clusters using a standard API. Coordinators communicate with workers and clients using a REST API, and the connection can be secured via the server configuration. So here from the left, we can see the multiple types of clients that can communicate with Trino. We can see Jupyter, Tableau, and the Trino CLI client. In order to understand how Presto communicates with Aerospike, we need to get through some translation tables. The table from the left maps the Aerospike data sources terms to Trino. So we can see that cluster is a Presto catalog, namespace is a schema, set is translated to table, record as a row, and bin as a column. Trino and Aerospike work with different data types, and the table from the right shows us the mappings for them. The interesting part here are the Aerospike CDTs mappings. The Aerospike list and map are handled as JSON type within Trino, which has a rich set of functions to operate its data. Trino has its own list and map types, but being the Java object, they cannot accept object heterogeneity that is supported by Aerospike. There are also some limitations in terms of SQL command support, like delete, update. Create table is also not supported since an Aerospike set is a logical unit and doesn't have to be created explicitly. As we have seen, GeoJSON is handled as a simple JSON type in Trino. Aerospike Connector comes with a wide set of configuration properties, which I described in detail on the documentation page. Aerospike Trino Connector has not been open sourced, and the pre-built plugin is available for download at the Aerospike Connectors page. To make the installation easy, we created a repository which sets up a Trino cluster with the Aerospike connector. It can be either a single node test environment or multi-node cluster. Now, let's set up a single node Trino cluster and see some basic queries in action. The first thing I did, I cloned the repository, and now I will build an image of the Trino server with the Aerospike connector. So let's run this Docker build. What I specified here is some argument that are available, the connector version, which is version 1 by default, and the Trino version, which is 3.5.1 also by default. So I show these arguments for the presentation. So let's run. All right, so we have an image, and now I will run a single node Trino cluster on Docker container. And again, what I specify here, I set a host list to my local Aerospike cluster, and I expose the port 8080 of the Trino coordinator for my Trino clients to connect. Okay, Trino starting. All right, and when we see this log, server started, so we know that server is up and running. The next thing, I will start the Trino CLI client here to the left, connecting to localhost 8080, the exact port that I've exposed. And I specify here my catalog, Aerospike and schema test. Now let's start. All right. So as I said, I will work with a local Aerospike cluster where I preloaded some data to explore. So let's start with some basic queries. Okay, show catalogs. We see the standard system catalog and our Aerospike catalog that I've configured. Next, let's see the schemas. I don't need to specify the catalog because I started the client with Aerospike catalog. So we see the information schema, which is the standard schema that exists in every catalog, and the test schema. Okay, next. I will show tables. Again, don't need to specify the schema because I've said it when I started the CLI. And we see here 3 tables in our test schema. So the default schema is the schema for the null set in Aerospike. And I also have here 2 other sets, the COVID stats and the Presto. So now let's run the count query on COVID stats and see that we have 60 rows in this table. Now select everything. Okay, so we can see some statistics about US COVID-19. Now I want to describe this table to see the column types. Right, so here we have a special column which is __ key, which is backed by the Aerospike record key. And all other columns are the bins in Aerospike. So now let me run some more complex queries on top of the data. So here I select the key and the case last week, and I add some ordering and limit the record set by 20. See another example. Okay, almost the same. And I choose the count rate to be between 2,500 and 2,800. Now I will run a query selecting by the primary key. So this query runs very fast because I'm not scanning the entire set and selecting by the record key. So here we see a single row. By the way, you can see the Trino statistic here at the bottom. Now I want to show how to insert rows to Aerospike using Trino. So here I want to insert a new row into the COVID stats table. So I specify here the primary key and the state territory. So I set here some new strings. All right. And I want also to insert a row without specifying a primary key. So I add here only the state there with the new string. We can see here that both were added. And now I want to select everything where the state territory is a new string. So let's see. We have 2 rows because we added 2 rows, and we can see that the row where we didn't specify the primary key, we have a random GUID instead. All right. Now to see operations on the Aerospike collection data type bins, I preloaded some data to the Presto table. So let's describe it to see what are the column types. So again, we have some integers, strings, and the interesting columns are list and map, which are handled as a JSON type in Trino, most of them. I want to run some queries using the JSON functions of Trino. So in this query, I want to extract the K2 values from the map column, and I specify that the value is not null. All right, so we can see here all the values. Now I will run a query on the list column. So here I use this JSON function. So I'm extracting the second element in the list, and I specify where the list is not null. So let's see. So we can see that not each list has a second element. So I will run a query, the same query actually, and I will fetch the first element of the list. You can see the only difference here is that this index is 0. And here, all of the lists which are not nulls have a first element. We just printed here. Back to the presentation. So now we query data in Aerospike using the Trino CLI client. I suggest you to visit the documentation of this repository to learn more about the configuration properties that are available. And the last thing I want to talk about is the Aerospike Data Browser that we already mentioned in the use cases slide. It's a Dockerized stack of Quicks, which is an open source JDBC web client tool, Presto, and the Aerospike Connect for Presto. The Quicks UI provides a DB Explorer and an SQL Editor, in addition to a notebook manager for managing your notebooks. Quicks uses a JDBC interface to connect to Presto, which already has the Aerospike Connector to translate SQL queries into API calls to the database. Now let me switch to the terminal. To get started, I will run a data browser in a Docker container. So here you can see that I expose 2 ports. The port 3000 is a default UI Quicks port. Here's the backend port of Quicks. And I also specify here a host list for my local Aerospike cluster, the same cluster that we already worked with the Trino CLI. Okay. Now we can see that everything has started and the data browser is up and running. So now let me connect to it using my browser. So here I connected to the data browser on my localhost port 3000, and this is how the home page looks like. So here at the home page, we have some buttons to manage notebooks. We can add notebook, look into a stored notebooks, and I will go to the DB Explorer. So it will load and connect to the Aerospike. You will see the catalog Aerospike. Again, the same thing that we have seen using the Presto CLI client. Open the test a database, and we see same 3 tables. So let's look. So you can also open to see the columns and the type of the columns in each table. And I will open an SQL Editor with a simple query. So this is how the Quicks SQL Editor looks like. So we have here the result set of this simple query. Select everything and limit it to 1000. So which features do we have here? So first thing, we can run and download. So if we press it here, yes, we can download the record set. Run it again. And what we have charts and we have pie graphs. So let's start from charts. So we can change the columns and see different graphs that will visualize our data. We'll switch to pie graph, and yes, we have a pie graph by the state. So we can again choose different columns and see the values on a graph. Back to the presentation. So this was the data browser to explore and visualize data stored in Aerospike. All right, in this talk we have learned about the Aerospike Connect for Presto. We have set it up and tried various queries against an Aerospike server. We also had a look at the Aerospike Data Browser, which is a handy tool to browse Aerospike data quickly and easy using SQL. I hope you enjoyed this session and learned some practical things. Please subscribe to the Aerospike stand-up to be updated with the latest developer news about Aerospike. Also, let us know about your experience of using the Aerospike Connect for Presto. Thank you.
Thanks all for joining our session, and thanks so much, Yevgeny, for that wonderful presentation. My name is Kiran Madi. I'm the Director of Product for the Aerospike product line here at Aerospike, and I'm joined by Joe Martin, who heads up the engineering for Aerospike Connect. So we have gotten a few questions in the past 20 minutes or so, and Yevgeny, I'm going to bring it up and share it with you. A little bit. All right. So the first question that we received was, does the Aerospike Connect for Presto support write statements such as insert, delete, etc.?
All right. Yes, the Aerospike Connect for Presto supports the insert command, and it allows to insert without specifying the primary key and with the primary key. So in case we use insert command without the primary key, it will generate the random UUID as a key. And the delete command is currently supported only by the Hive connector of Presto. And Presto has some limitations to make it available for implementation for other connectors. Update command is not supported at all by Presto.
And that's a Presto limitation, right? Okay.
That's correct. Yes.
Thanks, Yevgeny. Moving on to the next question. Is the connector a part of the Trino project? I believe the question is whether it's bundled as a part of the Trino project.
All right. No, currently the connector hasn't been open sourced yet. And if you need, you can download it, the pre-built plugin jars, actually, from the official release on the Aerospike site.
Okay. Thanks, Yevgeny. The next question that I see is, I am an experienced Aerospike user, but I'm new to Trino Presto. Where should I start?
All right. So the fact that you are familiar with the Aerospike is a big advantage. So you can understand the data sources and the types mapping quickly. The first thing that I would suggest is to go to the official site. It's Trino.io or Presto.db.io, it depends, and read their Get Started page. They have good documentation there. And it's beneficial to understand the concepts and how the framework is built and works. Then when you are ready with that, you can visit our documentation on how to get started with the Aerospike connector for Presto and give it a try.
Sounds good, Yevgeny. Moving on to the next question. Can the connector be deployed in Kubernetes?
Okay, good question. So currently we don't have a deployment for a Presto connector on Kubernetes, but we have a deployment on Docker as a cluster. So you can set up a Trino Presto cluster with the Aerospike connector on Docker and have multiple workers, multiple coordinators, but still not Kubernetes. We are working on that.
Right. And that's something that you showcased a little while ago, right, Yevgeny, in the demo that you showed us.
Yeah, that is
right.
correct. Right.
Okay. One more question. Does the connector work with managed Presto services in AWS and GCP?
Yes. So we don't have a managed setup for the Presto connector yet, but I think that the cloud team works on that, but I don't think we have it right now.
So, Yevgeny, I think in theory it should be supported, but it's just that we haven't tested it yet, right?
Yes, we can deploy it like on bare metal, you know.
Yeah, as long as it's Trino, yeah, right. It's managed Trino in the cloud. I think we should be able to support it.
Yes.
Okay, and I think a few questions have come through in the chat window as well. Okay, let me check. Okay, the first one was if the data, this came from Gautam, if the data is stored using blob or serialized Marshall, that's what it means, in Aerospike, do we still have a mechanism to run SQL? Just want to get an understanding of how using blob to save disk space in Aerospike will not be a feature limitation with Pulsar SQL. Did you understand the question?
So you mean if you have a blob at Aerospike, can we query the data? Right?
So the data structure is basically key blob. So he has a key and the blob. Actually, I've answered this question. So if they can run queries on the keys, right, we return the blobs as a part of the result set, right? But we can't run queries on the blobs, basically. We can't parse it, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So I think,
right.
Yeah, that was the response. And the next one is from Anaya. How does Presto deal with some fields that are serialized?
Some fields are serialized. Serialized to JSON, to which format?
Anaya, can you, if you're still around, can you please clarify what?
So as an example, I can.
Or just assume, yeah.
Yeah. So
JSON or something.
JSON. So yeah, we handle the CDTs, the Aerospike CDTs, which are lists and maps as a JSON format at Presto. So you can query lists and maps using the JSON functions on Presto and Trino.
Yeah. And that's something that Presto in and of itself supports, right? Querying via JSON, basically.
Yes.
That's the, right. I believe that's what Anaya was referring to. And that's all I have. Thanks all for joining this session. I hope it was useful. Thank you.
Thank you.